Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us at this event from Litfest. And I'm Kevin Selwyn. I'm happy to introduce my daughter, Hannah. And we're going to tell you for a few minutes the story of our family's journey. I want to give you can I stand up? Is that okay? I think I want to stand for just a second. I do better when I move. It's kind of like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, you know? So just briefly, a little history on our family. My wife and I are the children of 4 school teachers. So we grew up in middle-class America. I was in New York. She was in the center of the country in Iowa. And we met in college. And we were, I think, like a lot of people are, very engaged in our community in some way or another. I worked for Habitat for Humanity in my charitable time, and my wife worked for an organization called the United Way, which is a very philanthropic organization in the United States. And we thought we were doing pretty well. We thought that we had very deeply engaged with our community. And what started happening in our lives as we started working more was we made more money, and we spent it like a lot of people did. We just, we bought nice cars and we bought a nice house, and that built up into this really nice home that my wife would refer to as her dream house. And this was a house that had a big, beautiful kitchen. It was a great place to entertain, and it was the place that we thought all of our families, all of our children's friends would come visit. And we thought we were also being very generous at the same time. So there were those two things. We were generous on the one hand, we were making a lot of money and consuming on the other hand. Things were going quite well, we thought. But then Hannah came along, and things changed dramatically. And so I'll let Hannah tell you the story of the time when she was 14 and what happened then.
Okay, I think I'll stand too. So I was 14 years old and was raised by 2 amazing parents. And I was coming home from a night at a friend's house, and I was in the car with my dad. And we were just talking, chatting, and stopped at a very familiar stoplight about a mile from our home. And I'm sitting there and I'm looking, and I see a man to my left, a scene I'd seen 1,000 times before, holding up a sign saying, "Hungry, homeless, please help." Now, like I said, I've seen this a million times before, but what made this different was that while we were sitting at this stoplight, a beautiful black Mercedes pulled up on my right side. And so I was sitting there between this homeless man on my left and this Mercedes on my right. And I'm 14, so I'm going back and forth between the haves and the have-nots of this situation. And I said to my dad, Dad, if that guy in the Mercedes didn't have such a nice car, then that man over there, the homeless guy, could have a meal. And he said, well, yeah, that's true. But if we didn't have such a nice car, that man could have a meal. So that night, we went home, and we had a family dinner at our big table. We were eating Chinese food, and I really couldn't get over this situation in the car with my dad. And I started talking to my mom and my brother about it, and I said, I really feel like we're not doing enough. We're not making a big difference in the world, and we have so much and other people have so little. How is this possible? And my mom is kind of getting offended. She says, well, we make very generous contributions. At Christmas time, we write big checks. You might not see that, but we are very generous. I said, well, how come I don't see that? How come we're not involved? And so my mom said, well, what do you want to do? You want to sell our house? And I said, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. And so that is what we did. We decided to sell our house, this beautiful dream house that my mom would say, move into one half the size, and give the money to charity. So this started a year-long process because my parents were very familiar with how to invest money to make more money, but we didn't know how to invest money to make social change. So we met as a family, as a group, as a foursome, every Sunday over bagels and coffee or orange juice, whatever. And we would talk about the big problems of the world. We would talk about, what matters most to us as a group. And we talked about this for a year. And then we finally decided to give to an organization called the Hunger Project, which primarily works in Africa, India, and Bangladesh. And what they really aim to do is lift people from the ground up, really invest mainly in women, and helping people create brighter futures for themselves. So I'm going to let my dad take over again and kind of talk about what we're doing now and how this changed us.
So during that year that Hannah described, there's a few things that I really want to point out. Number one is every major decision we made as a family. One person, one vote. So let me help you realize what I'm saying here. That meant that the decisions that were made over this significant investment, the hormonal, teenage, insane kids had just as much say over how to invest the money as we very rational, logical adults. And what that did was that it completely transformed our family into one in which we had a connection among each other that was much deeper, much more founded in a common currency. And by doing that, what we were able to recognize was that our family began to change. The relationships within our family began to change. We also realized, number two, was that philanthropy is an everybody game. It's not a game for the wealthy. In our case, we gave away half of our house. That's a big thing. And I'll let you breathe a lot easier by telling you that I don't expect anybody in this room to give away their house. But I guarantee you, you could find half of something in your life that you have more than enough of. And it could be the clothing in your closet. It could be the hours that you watch television. It could be the money that you spend at that great American chain, Starbucks, for coffee. And what happens is, if you were to get together with the most important people in your life, whether that be your family or the people on your street, and you all did the same thing, cut in half, say the number of hours of television that you watch a week. Say you cut it from 4 hours to 2, and now all of a sudden you have 2 hours free that you can go as a community to clean up the neighborhood park or clean up the water. Doesn't cost anything. That's not a game for the wealthy, that's a game for anyone. And now all of a sudden everybody can start to feel that endorphin rush and that feeling of what it's like to be a giver, what it's like to be more deeply connected to their community. And with that, I think I'm going to stop and let Anu tell you her story, which, frankly, I'm excited to hear myself.
Hi. By training, I'm a social worker, but our destiny took me to the corporate world. And we were helping a little here and there, but nothing very definite. And my son was always keen, not always. He had studied abroad for 8 years, and when he came back, I think the poverty bothered him. We who live in India, we get used to it. We're not so sensitive. If we see a man on the street lying down, we assume he's an alcoholic. We don't go and help him. So my son said, "Mom, why don't we give a large portion of what we earn to social causes. And he put a gun at me and he said, if you don't spend 80% of what we earn, I will go back to England. So I hate anyone forcing me to do something. So I said, go ahead, go to England. Of course, my daughter and her husband got in and we all had a chat. And my son said, I'm sorry if I put it crudely, but I know by nature you're not a person who likes to consume. Now we have enough, why not give some more? And before we could decide, he met with a car accident and he died. And this was playing on my mind very much. And I said, let's start in a small way. And I wanted to find a credible NGO. And everyone pointed me to Shaheen Mistry in Mumbai, who was running an NGO called Akanksha. How many of you are familiar with Shaheen? Most of you, okay. So she is a remarkable person. So I remember I went to see her with a list of questions. And Shaheen and I clicked. And at that time, Akanksha used to have centers where poor children who went to municipal schools and didn't learn much came to those centers for 2 to 2.5 hours, and they were taught English, maths, creativity, and have a little bit of fun. So over time, I brought those centers to Pune, and we started having 25 centers in Pune. Shaheen invited me to join the board. And at the board, we were wondering, we are not able to impact the examination results of these children. They have good confidence, because self-confidence, because they speak English, and they could get simple jobs like in Coffee Day or somewhere, but we couldn't really impact their lives. So we said, why don't we start schools? So I knew the commissioner, so in Pune, we started our first school under the PPP model, public-private partnership. And this was Thermex Foundation, not our personal money, that started looking after 7 schools. What was the model? The government gave the building, Akanksha looked after the education, and Thermex Foundation looked at the finances, took care of the finances. Later, when Teach for India was started 8 years ago, Shaheen asked me if I would partner her. And I willingly agreed. And that's when we started 30% of our dividend income going to social causes from our personal funds. And my daughter fully supported me. In fact, my son-in-law fully supported me. But my son-in-law is not involved. My daughter is as involved as I am. But I must tell you, unlike your story, we were talking about Akanksha and Teach for India on our dining table, everywhere my kids were, and they hated these 2 organizations. They hated the names of a few people who worked for them, and they said, please do what you want, but don't keep talking about it all the time. So, if you overdo it, I think you can make the family almost allergic to it. So be careful. Then my son-in-law had a wonderful idea about 2 years ago. He said, we've never sat down and explained what we are trying to do. So we sat with our children in our family office and we explained the whole journey, what we are doing. And I must say, it had a profound impact on them. Though, even now, if I buck them, my son-in-law will say, I'll give 30%, leave me alone. So, this is my advice to you. Don't thrust it on anyone. Gently introduce them to whatever you want them to do. I'd like you to tell us a little bit more about the schools where you are interested now, what you're doing there.
So, what Anu is asking about, we were discussing this prior. After our book came out in 2010, when Hannah and I wrote a book together called The Power of Half. And there was we had a book signing in Atlanta, which is where we were living at the time. And it was one of the early book events. So there was a large group of people who we knew and they knew us, and they kind of looked like us, a lot of white people and, that kind of thing. And at the very end of the line was this tall, shaved-headed African-American man. And he's got a copy of the book in his hand, and it's clear he bought it a couple days earlier because it's got dog-eared pages and Post-it notes sticking up. And he leans over the table where I'm signing books and Hannah's signing books, and he says, "Mr. Selwyn, I know you wrote this book for rich white people, but let me tell you something. It's the poor black child who needs you. Can we talk?" And I said, "Sure we can talk, but what do you mean by the poor black child?" And he says, "I want the poor kids in my community to understand the same power that your children understood from being givers. That feeling of, I can control something outside of me. That feeling of, I have the ability to be a helper, to be of support to someone else." It gets back to that point I made earlier of philanthropy is an everybody game, not a somebody game or a game for the wealthy. So Ed Morris is his name, and Ed grew up, by the way, in a very difficult family in the middle of the United States in a city called St. Louis that's very tough. Had a gun held to his head when he was 5 years old in a robbery. Had his hand partly cut off and reattached. And he swore that he was going to live his life helping kids. And that's what he does. He's a social worker in some of the worst schools in Atlanta. And so he and my wife Joan and my family and I built a curriculum to help kids recognize their own power to change their lives. Because our belief was, we can't change their neighborhoods immediately, we can't change their families, but what we can change is their ability to see themselves in a different way and to build themselves out of their circumstance through their own initiative. And so that's been working in now 6 schools, and we've had great success with it. We've been very excited about it. So,
I don't know how many of you know about Teach for India? Yeah, quite a few. We were told that you don't have, in fact, writing a check is relatively very easy. But getting involved, I think, is very important. For me at least, that's what makes it meaningful. And I want to tell you, the fellows who join Teach for India and give their time for 2 years are also great philanthropists. To give 2 years of your time at the peak of your career, when these girls and boys could have got the best of jobs because they are the brightest. We select the best. We select about 5 to 7% of the people who apply, because teaching in India is not an aspirational job, and we want to make it a very aspirational profession. So these fellows give 2 years, and when they see how rotten our education system is, 60 to 65% of those fellows stay back in the social sector. They don't join the corporates. They stay back. To me, that's a wonderful way. And I think, and I want to give you, I know the numbers are not many, but the Akanksha schools where the TFI fellows work, 5 of these skilled children have been selected by United World College to study in Italy, Armenia, Singapore, and in Mahendra College outside Pune. That means they are out of poverty. After the 12th standard, they will get a scholarship to study abroad. Can you imagine? Slum children. One of the girls, Priyanka, who is in Italy, comes from a family where her father committed a murder and is in the jail. And she has been brought up by a single mother. She, in turn, invited the children in her school in Italy, foreigners from Japan, England, America, to come to India in the summer holidays, stay at her house, and get involved in her community and in the schools. And 10 children came, and they got so immersed in this work. It's a chain reaction. You know, you spread this to others. And I just don't want to preach, but I find that if I buy anything material, say I buy a flat, it's joy of diminishing return. You're very, very happy, but it doesn't last. You lose interest. But when you give for a good cause, and you have to be careful which cause you give it to, the joy multiplies. It just increases, because as you see the work spreading, doing good things, affecting people positively, it's a high that you get. It's really wonderful. And you don't have to be millionaires and billionaires to give. You can give a little bit of your time, a little bit of anything that you have. So,
Can you explain a little bit about your own thinking in terms of philanthropy? Now, you know, there's many places people could give. There's medical, you know, hospitals, that kind of thing. There's homelessness, that kind of thing. You seem to choose education over those. Can you talk a little bit about your thought process?
Sure. For me, it was meeting Shaheen that her enthusiasm and passion rubbed on me, and that's how I got interested in education for the underprivileged. But living in India, there are so many competing causes. There's malnourishment. I don't know if you know, we have the highest number of malnourished children in the world. Even though now 10% has come down, we are still the highest. We have female feticide. We have jobless people. We have skill development. Oh, there are so many causes. So you have to select a cause which appeals to you. In education, I don't know how many of you know that ASAR, which is a Pratham report that comes out every alternate years, has indicated that education, instead of improving, is going backwards in India. And there was an international survey called PISA, which showed that out of 76 or 77 countries all over the world that took place, India came second last. And the country that did worse than us was Kyrgyzstan. Can you imagine? What did India do? Did they get alarmed and say, let's do something? They said, this is not a report which we accept, because the questions asked were not relevant to Indian students. It was relevant to 76 countries, but not to India. So we discontinued taking part in PISA. So if we are ostriches, and without proper nourishment and education, can you imagine what will happen to India? Can you imagine in India where a large majority of the people cannot take part in anything meaningful? Can you imagine? And your children and grandchildren will be part of that India. So what made you do education? This man who was there, or something more?
Education for me is a byproduct of the broader idea of our family. Our family's focus is on the working poor. So in other words, not the homeless for the most part, but slightly a level above that. So people who have jobs. In the United States, it's very common for people who are making minimum wage, which in most states is $7.50 an hour, which sounds like a lot in the Indian economy, but it is not a lot in the American economy. And that barely allows them to have a substandard apartment if they're working that type of work. And very often within poor communities, the United States, as you know, has a high violence rate, therefore it also has a high incarceration rate. So a lot of men are taken away from the families. And so what happens is it's often a single mother who's working one job, two jobs. The children are coming home, they're letting themselves into the apartment. They're not doing their homework, they're watching television for the next 5 hours till the mom comes home. And those kids have essentially a path straight to their next level of poverty. And so our view is if the families are working and they want to move to another level, that where we can be most effective, and this is something that we worked very hard on during that one-year process that Hannah was talking about, if we can come in at an inflection point right here to where the family is attempting to make a move upward, then we can be pretty effective there, and that's a pretty good place for us to use our philanthropic resources, whether it be our time or our money.
Well, I was just going to add that when we decided to invest in the Hunger Project, that investment is going toward villages in Ghana. And when we have visited Ghana, that was something that stuck out to me, was that these people in these villages wanted to get to the next level. They wanted to get themselves out of poverty, which is incredibly important for that kind of work, which is why the Hunger Project focuses so much on helping people become self-reliant and helping them get themselves out of poverty. And that's something that we focus on, is finding people right at that point where my dad was saying, where people want to make their lives better. And I just had I just had another question for you. You said, and I know you got involved originally because of your son, but I want to know, when was the point for you when it was of course about him, but when it really became for you very passionate, and when you decided this is something that I want to continue doing and something that I love doing?
You know, it's so infectious. Once you give and you see the results, it sucks you in. You know, you really want to do more and more and more. And recently, some people called Zia Modi, then Anita Dongre, the fashion designer, and me for a panel discussion. And I remember Anita and Zia talking about their work having their passion. They get up in the morning with passion, they love it. And when I looked at myself and I said, work wasn't a passion for me when I was running the company. It was a legacy I had to save, so I did what I can, but it wasn't a passion. Then someone asked me, what is your passion? And I said, I found my passion in social work. I found it through education. So today I can definitely say my passion is my social activities.
I want to add one other thing, and I think terminology matters a lot. And Hannah used the word investing in the lives of people. And we never talk about charity. We don't talk about giving. We don't talk about recipients and givers. Because we actually think that when you use the terminology of investing, you're talking about actually teaming up with assets, right? And we've all invested money in something, and it drives me crazy as an investor to have underutilized assets. So as a human on this planet, the idea that a kid is growing up in a place where that child is automatically seen as an underutilized asset drives me crazy. And so I want to invest in other people's lives. I want to invest in human beings so that they can become better performing assets. And they can't do that unless they're doing that themselves with our help. So.
in India, a lot of people say that if they are giving through this compulsory CSR, they've done their bit. A lot of business people feel that they pay the taxes, they employ people, so again, they've done a bit. I think this is not right. I am being a bit judgmental, but look at the wealth we have. Look at the lavish weddings we have. Look at the way our women wear their jewelry. In a poor country like ours, we are so out of touch with reality. I remember Bill Gates came with Warren Buffett about 7 years ago to encourage philanthropy in India. And Melinda, Bill Gates' wife, had a tiny gold necklace around her neck. And when they invited potential philanthropists at 4 o'clock in the afternoon in Delhi, they had the diamonds, necklaces, glittering saris. And I said, look at the contrast. These people are giving majority of their funds for other countries to come up. And we who have so much, destination weddings. I am being judgmental, but I think let's now look at some of our values. What are we doing in a country? And how long will the poor just sit and see us? They see us doing all this. How long will they sit back and will they revolt one day? And if they don't, I'm amazed. I would revolt if I were in their place. Would you? Would you revolt? Huh? I think I would. So what do you think? Is it capitalism which has glaring differences? What's your opinion about that?
Well, there's that old expression about capitalism, that capitalism is the second worst economic system, and that everything else is tied for first. So, you know, I haven't found a system yet that I think works better than the capitalist system, but the problem with capitalism, and I'm at Stanford University this year as a fellow, as is my wife, and what I've been mostly studying is income inequality and solutions for that. And that is a difficult problem. I have to say it's a difficult problem. But, you know, the nature of capitalism is how much can you acquire? And that often is a significant negative for the people who have no opportunity to create any wealth at all. So I didn't know if it was time for us to open up questions from the audience. Do we want to bring a microphone out there?
I just want to say one thing. In India, it's part of our philosophy that we don't talk about how much we give. We say our right hand shouldn't know what the left hand is doing. Am I right? And it's in bad taste to say what you're doing. And my daughter kept saying, Mommy, we shouldn't talk about it. And then I realized that maybe we should. Because how do we help others also to give? And unless we talk and make them think, they wrote a book that affected me. I read it many years ago. So I think there's nothing wrong in honestly saying what you're doing. You don't exaggerate, you don't do anything, but say what you're doing with the idea that it would motivate others.
Well, I actually love that idea, and we don't give anonymously. When we give, our name is on it. And that's not because we have an ego about it, but it's really about the question of we want to talk about the fact that we are giving. And we think other people might be inspired by that, or other people might say, oh, okay, well, if they're giving to poverty-related causes, then maybe I'll give to healthcare. We think that's great. So, were you going to add something?
Yeah, I've got the mic.
Oh, you do? Great. Even better.
A few words about myself before, so you can understand where I'm coming from. My name is Professor Sitesh Dutt. I am a management consultant. I used to work for the Procter & Gamble company, P&G, which is very big in the US.
Yes.
They say,
I use a lot of their shampoo. Yes.
Yeah, they say that more than 98% American households use at least one P&G product or the other. And that figure might be more because Gillette we acquired.
Yes.
So possibly everybody in the US knows about Procter & Gamble. Now, P&G in India, I was the Asia Pacific coordinator for industrial hygiene and safety for the Asia Pacific region. Now retired, I teach, I've taught at management institutes, but I realize what Anu says. I knew Anu's husband, Rohinton, who has passed away, a beautiful family. You see, these values we teach, finally what, as parents, what are we passing on to our children? We should think about that, not about the money. Now, Hannah, I was very much interested in her and your role in developing her, because I find one of the problems is, as parents we have, how do we pass on certain value systems? Now, the children are very smart. They understand what you really mean. And I was amazed when you said that you have them as a part of the decision-making process when she does not know very much about life. At 14, she doesn't have the experience which you had. But despite that, you gave her the freedom to express herself. And I find that very energizing. Few of our Indian families do that. Although in a Sanskrit there is a saying that once the child is 16, you have to treat that child as an equal. Very easily said, but very difficult to do. Let me tell you, I'm having problems with my own son. He's the only son. My wife passed away, so I'm the only parent. But how difficult it is to pass on your value systems to your children. So congrats to you that Hannah has picked up those things and you have developed as a fine family. So very good luck to you in your endeavor. That's all I could say. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I just want to respond very quickly to say, first of all, I don't think that we're particularly great parents. I really don't. I think I think parenting is the hardest job I've ever had. I'm sure most of the parents in this audience will agree. I made two good decisions as a parent. Number one was we believed in showing, not telling. So while we might tell our kids as much as way more than they want to hear, you should be involved in the community. What we did was when Hannah was 6 years old, we would work at the food bank together. It was one of the few places where she could be as a small child. And we would always, afterwards, we'd go out for donuts. So it was always a fun experience. So being engaged in the community was always something that was part of her DNA. That was one good decision that we made. The other decision that I made was I figured out when Hannah was about 12 and my wife, is about 2 years younger than I am, I figured out that if I just listen to the women in my family, life will be much better. And so. Yes, sir.
Can I go now?
Oh, yes, please.
Hi, my name is Aditya. I'm 20 years old and I study economics here in Mumbai. I have a question for all three of you. First to Hannah, this is directed to you because you're the youngest here and I connect to you. So you're young and you cared about inequality. I do that too, but a lot of my friends don't. And so my question to you is, how do you talk to them about this and how do you communicate your feelings? And yeah, that's my question to you.
That's a great question.
Just finish all my questions, I guess. Second question to Kevin, sir. How do you decide where to donate? I think all of us believe that all lives have equal value. Why did you decide to donate to a foreign country and why not your own country? I mean, should I donate to Teach for India, which works in India? Should I donate to an African educational NGO? How do I decide this and how do I balance this? Second question, last question to Anu ma'am. I have immense respect for what you've done and what you're doing right now, but there's this movement called effective altruism. I don't know if you've heard about this. And within that, there's an organization called 80,000 Hours. There is an organization called 80,000 Hours. And basically, 80,000 hours is the number of hours in the average career of a human being. So what they recommend is that young people should decide to work in a high-paying career, for example, finance or technology, and then decide to donate a large amount of their income to charity. And maybe this will be really more impactful than working in an NGO. So if I want to have an impact, maybe I should consider working at an investment bank and donating half my income. What do you have to say about this?
Okay, I'll go first. This was something that I really struggled with when we were originally doing our family project and when I was trying to convince my family to sell our house, because none of my other friends were doing that, and it really didn't make any sense to people. But what I learned was that something makes sense to everybody. So in high school, I had a friend, and she wasn't as passionate about the inequalities as I was, but she was very passionate about the environment. And so I would try to talk to her about the environment, and while I was talking to her about the environment, I would also talk about the inequalities and things that I was passionate about. And it ended up, after months and months of talking to her about kind of things that she was interested in, she decided to do her own half project. And she decided that every time she was going to order out some pizza, she was going to put $5 in a jar. And she ended up saving, I think it was like $1,000 or something. And she gave...
It's a lot of pizza.
Which is a lot of pizza. And she gave that to an environmental organization. And I thought that was so cool. I had, no intention of convincing her to do anything. And she convinced herself after we kind of were exploring what she was interested in. And I've seen this throughout college too. Not everybody's interested in what I'm interested in, but everybody's interested in something. So figuring that out and then kind of talking to them about that and having them explore that, because also they're experiencing that same thing, that they don't have people to talk to about what they're passionate about. So I try to figure out, what are you passionate about? What are you interested in? And then talking to them about that, because I know that it's a struggle that we all face. I don't know if that is...
I'll quick...
Question.
Oh, go
Sorry,
ahead.
you were saying something. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to answer my question quickly. We all have work to do on this panel. First of all, this is a smart young man right here. I want to hire that guy. So your question was, how did we decide where to invest our funds, and why we decided to invest with the Hunger Project in Ghana, as opposed to investing in the United States. We do invest in the United States. We do invest in our own neighborhood and our own community, and we think that's very important. We don't see it as an either or, we see it as an and. And so one of the questions we discussed around our dining room table during this year-long process was, how do we define community? So is it our family? Is it the people on our street? Is it our city? Is it our state? Is it our country? Is it our world? And the answer that we came up with was yes. We do believe we are members of the world community, and if the world is a stronger and more opportunistic filled place, that's a great thing. So we do as much as we can kind of along that trajectory.
Sorry, I wasn't sure. Was your question, is it better to make a lot of money and give in charity rather than give your time? Is that it? Yeah? Sorry? Yeah. I wouldn't like to be prescriptive. It's entirely up to you what you do. But even if you make a lot of money, you can create a little time to be involved in something. It may not be full time, maybe 1 hour a week, 2 hours a week, whatever, because that sensitizes you. Just writing a check doesn't sensitize you. And there are NGOs like Give India, Dasera, who help you, tell you about what are the causes where you can give. Look up, Google, and for example, if you look up Give India, you'll find the sector that gets least amount of money is human rights. They get the least amount. So you may want to do that, and you may check what that means. So there are ways of finding out.
And even within companies, there is often a service group within that company. So I think that's actually a great way to have, an and experience, right? You can. I'm a capitalist. I think capitalism is great, I have no problem with making money. It gives you the tools to be able to do other things. But it's a question of what you then do with those resources that I think ends up being the big question.
Yeah, just to also add to that, I mean, when we set out to do this, we were never telling people that that giving should hurt. It should never, I don't ever think that it should hurt. We looked at our lives, and the thing that we decided that we had too much of was a house. We didn't use all of the space in our house. It really separated us. So that was our thing. I still think that if you want to buy a nice car, I used the Mercedes in my story, and that is exactly what happened. But I think that if you have a Mercedes and you like to drive a Mercedes, you should have a Mercedes. But what it really comes down to is just being aware of what you're doing and being aware of what you have, and if you're comfortable with that. If you're comfortable with that, then I'm comfortable with that. But we weren't comfortable. So that's why we did that. And I live in New York, and I work in advertising. Most people would say that's not a profession that is, very socially minded. I'm selling people things they don't need. But within my company, like my dad said, there are ways to give back, and I try to be as involved with those things as possible. And if being in advertising will get me where I want to be, then I will be charitable and will continue how I was raised.
Hello, Anu. Anu mentioned about the Indian saying that when you give with right hand, your left hand should not know. We have another thing also about, if you have something in your left hand, what you want to give, don't change your hand and give it right. Give it your left, lest you change your mind before that.
Yeah.
Because giving is so difficult. When you want to give, your spouse or your family members will tell you 100 reasons why you should not give. Women have a lot of insecurity about rising prices, about the cost of medication. My wife always tells me, 10,000 क्यों 5,000 काफ़ी नहीं है क्या हमारा क्या होगा हॉस्पिटल का बिल कितना आता है. So, I mean, bringing the spouse or a child to your thinking, it takes a hell of a lot. So for heaven's sake, if you want to give something, even secretly, give it. I also wanted to give a little information about some organizations. There's a Friends of Trees, Friends of Tribal Societies, who are running 50,000 schools in India. A school in a tribal village runs with a donation of only 20,000 per year at the moment. When I started, it was 11,000. In this village, one single teacher teaches a group, and their target is 1 lakh. When I went to a similar project, I met a skin specialist, surgeon, and he says a lot of poor women in the village, because they cook on the ground, and they wear synthetics. So they catch fire, and the young girl can burn her face. Now, I found it difficult to say that I'll donate my skin, but when he told me that we remove the skin only from the back and from the thighs, it doesn't disfigure the body, I immediately signed the page. Many of us don't know there's now increasing fashion or talk about organ donation, but some parts of our body, like a skin, like eyes and other things, we can do a lot for Indian society.
As a woman, I can't accept your observation that women are insecure and not willing to give.
I'm sorry, I apologize.
No, I'm just saying,
Yeah.
It's not a gender related, that may be your experience, but most people don't know what's enough. Enough is not what's there out there, but in our minds. What's enough? It's the insecurity we have. All of us have it. And what is enough, we don't know. So we have to battle with our own insecurity and decide what to do.
Yeah, can I ask something? My question would be to you. When you said that people who are capable to understand that they want to do something good, and you are there bridging the gap between them to achieve something. That's what you do. You help them achieve something. But what about those who are themselves unaware that they want to do something good, that they are capable of doing something good, but they are not able to do? How are you able to instill the thing that you can do better, that this is not what you compose of?
Who were you asking that question of?
I was asking this to you.
Of us?
Yeah.
So ask that last part again, please.
Okay. So my main question was, you help people who are not able to achieve something in their life. You help them bridge the gap. But what about those who are themselves unaware that they can achieve? Have you instilled that instinct in them that they give something?
I see. I hear your question. Okay. And I think everyone wants to succeed. I really do. I think it's a basic human motivation to want to be better than you are today, that you can see something in the future. The question is how to get there. And the question for us as a family has always been, where are we going to put our limited resources, right? And so I've never worked with the homeless. I don't know the population very well. I think I could throw myself into that and become somebody who really understands that population more deeply. I think when I focus on the next slight tier up, and when we have as a family, it's enabled us to become more targeted to do that work. The reality is this: there is so much work to do. It's almost overwhelming. So I think that the important thing is to find what you're personally passionate about and then go after it with a laser focus. And that gives you two things. One, it gives you an idea of what you need to be doing when you wake up in the morning. The other is it gives you the permission to say no to all the other stuff that's coming at you that makes the sense of hopelessness, wow, these problems are too big, they're too manifold. It allows you to say no to those and say, I'm working on this. I'm really happy somebody else is working with the homeless. I'm really happy somebody else is working on the arts. I'm really happy somebody else is working on the environment. They better hurry up in Delhi, right? Just as they better hurry up a lot of places, right? Because, and frankly, I'll tell you one last thing, and Anu, I'd love your thoughts on this. I think philanthropy and service is one of those places where we can take the most risk. Government has to be too conservative, and companies need to be too conservative. And so the risk places can be in philanthropy and service. And that's the places where we can test those crazy ideas that may just be the next big game changer, like Teach India.
We're out of time.
Can I ask one question, please?
One last question. We'll give one-word answers.
Yeah. Anu, very inspiring, and Hannah and Kevin. I just wanted to mention that don't you think, Anu, that in the small domain of our lives,
Sorry?
In the small domain of our lives, can't we make a difference, within the home, to our domestics, to our drivers, education, and a whole lot of things? Today, the salaries of our own domestics and drivers are absolutely out of sync with what the bosses are drawing. Our corporate salaries have zoomed in the last 20 years, particularly at top management levels. And I personally feel, I think that's an area where education, medical help, making a difference to those people's children can do a huge kind of a thing. Number two, I think you spoke about capitalism. There's no doubt that it's the best system, but only if it is conscious of its social responsibility. And I think the huge inequalities in the US, India now, huge, and China. The US, of course, we went to Harvard and there was a program where the US Gini coefficient is the highest amongst all countries in the world. India is no better now, we are faring worse. And another thing I found as a top management person, even in compensation, sitting on committees, most of the people are insensitive in India, especially top managements. The salaries have zoomed, barring companies like Tata's, Mahindra's, your company, where we don't go out of hand in paying anything just because others are doing it. Today, the top management differentials are simply atrocious in India, vis-a-vis the lowest. And that inequality is another thing we're subscribing to. So creating social sensitivity and the HR people being socially conscious, don't you think is something that we need to focus on?
Yeah, I think it's up to you. If you think that's important, that you look after your domestic people's education and health, that's wonderful. And maybe you can extend it to a few who are less fortunate than then also. At least they have a secured job, you know, it's your choice. And I agree there are huge differences, but I don't think in the short run things are going to change.